Tonight, the glittering chandeliers of the Grand Ballroom at the St. Regis Hotel in New York City cast a blinding light on an unfolding drama worthy of a Hollywood blockbuster. Billionaire magnate Julian Thorne thought he had orchestrated every detail of this charity gala, from the meticulously chosen guest list to the strategically placed photographers. He'd even gone so far as to ensure one name, a name that haunted his every success, was conspicuously absent: his ex-wife, the formidable Isabella Sterling. But little did Julian know fate, and perhaps a touch of exquisite irony, had a different script in mind. As the city's elite mingled, sipping champagne and exchanging pleasantries, a hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to the entrance as Isabella Sterling, the event's principal sponsor, made her grand entrance. The collective gasp was audible. Julian's carefully constructed wall of denial had just crumbled, revealing a story of ambition, betrayal, and the undeniable power of a woman scorned. Stay tuned as we delve into the intricate web of their past and the shocking events of this unforgettable night. The air in Julian Thorne's penthouse office overlooking Central Park crackled with the nervous energy of his assistant Emily Carter. Julian, a man whose steely gaze and sharp jawline spoke of ruthless ambition, paced behind his mahogany desk. The annual Children's Hope Gala, his pet project, and a significant social event on the New York calendar, was just days away. Every detail had been meticulously planned, every guest carefully vetted, except for one glaring omission. Emily Julian's voice was a low, controlled rumble confirm once more. Isabella Sterling is not on the guest list. Not as an individual, not as part of any corporate delegation, not under any alias. Emily, a bright young woman, usually unflappable under pressure, swallowed hard. Mr. Thorne, I have personally cross-referenced the entire list 3 times. Ms. Sterling's name does not appear anywhere. I've also flagged her company Sterling Enterprises to ensure no last-minute table purchases under their banner. A ghost of a smile touched Julian's lips. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the satisfied expression of a general who had successfully outmaneuvered his adversary. Isabella. Even her name tasted like ash in his mouth. 5 years had passed since their acrimonious divorce, a public spectacle fueled by accusations of infidelity and a bitter battle over Thorne Industries, the empire he had painstakingly built. He had emerged victorious, bruised but unbroken, while Isabella had retreated, licking her wounds, and he'd assumed fading into obscurity. He had underestimated her. Over the past few years, whispers had reached Julian. Rumors of Isabella's shrewd investments, her burgeoning real estate portfolio, and the quiet but steady growth of Sterling Enterprises. He had dismissed them as wishful thinking, the desperate attempts of a wounded ego to regain relevance. But beneath the veneer of his confidence, a nagging unease had begun to fester. Isabella had always possessed a tenacity that bordered on frightening, and the sponsor's Emily Julian pressed his gaze sharp. Go through the list again, every single corporate and individual donor. Emily's fingers flew across her keyboard. The list of benefactors for the gala was long and impressive, a testament to Julian's influence and the perceived prestige of the event. Names like the Vanderbilt Foundation, the Rothschild Investment Group, and numerous tech giants scrolled across her screen. Everything appears in order, Mr. Thorne Emily reported after a tense few minutes. The primary sponsors are the Thorne Foundation, of course, and then a consortium of smaller donors. She trailed off, her brow furrowed, and Julian's voice held a hint of impatience. There's a new entry, Mr. Thorne, a significant contribution made just last week. It's Sterling Enterprises. Julian's blood ran cold. It couldn't be. There had to be a mistake. Are you certain Emily double-checked the paperwork? The contact person? Everything. Emily's face was pale as she reread the details. The signatory is Isabella Sterling, Mr. Thorne. The donation is substantial enough to place Sterling Enterprises as a platinum-level sponsor, second only to the Thorne Foundation. A wave of disbelief, followed by a surge of icy fury, washed over Julian. Isabella, his ex-wife, the woman he had deliberately excluded, had not only managed to infiltrate his carefully controlled event, but had done so in a position of significant power and influence. This wasn't just about attending a gala. This was a calculated move, a public declaration of her resurgence. How did this happen? Julian's voice was tight with suppressed rage. Who authorized this sponsorship? The initial contact came through our development director. Mr. Davies. Emily explained, her voice barely above a whisper. He said the offer was unexpected, but generous, and, after verifying the legitimacy of Sterling Enterprises, he fast-tracked the agreement. He wasn't aware of the personal history, sir. Julian's mind raced. Davies was a seasoned professional, not prone to oversight. Isabella must have played her hand expertly, exploiting any potential blind spots. This wasn't just about charity. This was about making a statement, about reminding him and the entire city that she was still a force to be reckoned with. Emily. Julian said, his voice dangerously low. I want you to find out everything. How Isabella managed this, who she spoke to, every single detail. And then I want you to discreetly try and mitigate the situation. See if there's any way to reallocate the sponsorship, perhaps offer Sterling Enterprises a lower tier with less prominent visibility. Emily nodded quickly, her eyes wide with apprehension. She knew better than to argue with Julian when he was in this mood. The gala, which was supposed to be a celebration of philanthropy and Julian's continued success, was now poised to become a battleground. And Isabella Sterling had just fired the first shot. The days leading up to the Children's Hope Gala were a whirlwind of activity. Julian threw himself into the final preparations, attending endless meetings with caterers, security personnel, and the event's PR team. He tried to appear calm and in control, but beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. The knowledge of Isabella's impending presence gnawed at him, stirring up long-buried emotions, resentment, anger, and a grudging respect for her audacity. Emily, under strict instructions to be discreet, had managed to piece together some of the puzzle. Isabella had approached the Thorne Foundation through a third-party representative, presenting the sponsorship as a genuine philanthropic endeavor by a newly revitalized Sterling Enterprises. The speed and efficiency of the transaction had caught everyone off guard. By the time anyone within Julian's inner circle realized the connection, the agreement was signed and the funds had been transferred. Julian considered his options. He could try to publicly discredit Sterling Enterprises, but that would be messy and could backfire, potentially damaging the gala's reputation and his own. He could confront Isabella directly, but he knew that would likely only fuel her resolve. He could even try to buy her out of the sponsorship, but that would be an admission of defeat, a sign of weakness he couldn't afford to show. In the end, he decided to play it cool to maintain a facade of indifference. He would acknowledge Isabella's presence with polite civility, nothing more. He would not allow her to derail his event or his carefully constructed image. As the night of the gala arrived, the grand ballroom of the St. Regis was a spectacle of glittering gowns, impeccably tailored tuxedos, and the clinking of champagne glasses. The city's elite had turned out in force. Prominent business leaders, influential politicians, and a smattering of well-known celebrities. Julian, dressed in a classic black tuxedo, moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, and posing for photographs. He was the picture of the successful and benevolent host. But as the evening progressed, a subtle shift began to occur. Whispers rippled through the room, hushed conversations held behind elegantly gloved hands. The topic of discussion, Isabella Sterling's unexpected sponsorship. Did you hear Lady Beatrice Harrington, a society doyenne known for her extensive network of informants, murmured to her companion Arthur Finch, a renowned art collector. Isabella Sterling is a major sponsor tonight, Julian Thorne's ex-wife. Arthur's eyebrows shot up. The Isabella Sterling I thought she had all but disappeared after the divorce. Apparently not, Beatrice said, with a knowing smile. Rumour has it, Sterling Enterprises has been quietly making waves. This gala sponsorship is quite the statement, wouldn't you agree? Across the room, similar conversations were taking place. The unexpected twist had injected a jolt of intrigue into an otherwise predictable social event. People were speculating about Isabella's motives, her current standing, and of course the potential for an awkward encounter with her ex-husband. Julian, despite his attempts to remain aloof, was acutely aware of the undercurrent of gossip. He saw the curious glances, the subtle nudges, the hushed whispers that followed him as he moved through the room. He knew that the narrative of the evening was shifting, and he was no longer entirely in control of the story. He caught Emily's eye and gestured for her to join him. "What's the buzz, Emily?" he asked, his voice calm, but with an edge of steel. "So everyone is talking about Miss Sterling's sponsorship." Emily admitted, her face pale. "There's a lot of speculation. Speculation about what exactly about her intentions, sir, and about how you feel about it." Julian forced a smile. "Tell everyone I am delighted to have Sterling Enterprises as a sponsor. Their generous contribution will make a significant difference to the children we are supporting." He knew his words sounded hollow, even to his own ears. Just then, the master of ceremonies, a well-known television personality named Charles Graham, stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming through the ballroom, "please take your seats. Dinner will be served shortly, followed by our program for the evening." As the guests began to find their tables, Julian scanned the room, his eyes searching for a familiar face. He hadn't seen Isabella yet, and a strange mix of anxiety and anticipation churned in his stomach. He told himself he was simply curious, that he wanted to gauge the situation. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. He was waiting for her. The ballroom buzzed with conversation as waiters in crisp white uniforms began serving the first course. Julian found himself seated at the head table, flanked by prominent philanthropists and city officials. He engaged in polite conversation, forcing himself to focus on the present, but his attention kept drifting towards the main entrance. Then a hush began to fall over the room. It started subtly, a gradual quieting of voices, but it spread quickly like a ripple effect. All heads began to turn towards the doorway. And then she appeared. Isabella Sterling stood in the entrance, bathed in the soft glow of the foyer lights. She was a vision in a stunning emerald green gown that shimmered with every movement. The dress, a custom creation by renowned designer Vivian Holloway, featured a plunging neckline and a dramatic train that trailed behind her like liquid moonlight. Her dark hair was styled in an elegant updo, revealing a pair of dazzling diamond earrings. She moved with a grace and confidence that commanded attention, her eyes sweeping across the room, acknowledging no one in particular, yet somehow making everyone feel seen. Julian felt a jolt, a visceral reaction he hadn't expected. He had seen Isabella countless times over the years in casual clothes and formal attire, laughing and arguing, vulnerable and strong. But he had never seen her like this. There was a regal quality about her tonight, an aura of power and self-possession that was both captivating and intimidating. As Isabella stepped fully into the ballroom, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew who she was. Everyone knew the history. And everyone knew that her presence here as a major sponsor was no accident. Charles Graham, the master of ceremonies, seemed momentarily flustered. He quickly regained his composure and announced, his voice slightly louder than necessary. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome one of our esteemed platinum sponsors for this evening, Ms. Isabella Sterling." A smattering of polite applause broke out, but it was hesitant, overshadowed by the palpable tension in the room. People were unsure how to react. Was this a reconciliation? A confrontation? A deliberate act of defiance? Isabella acknowledged the applause with a gracious nod and began to walk towards her designated table. It was strategically located near the front, offering her a clear view of the stage, and more importantly, of Julian. As she made her way through the room, something unexpected happened. One by one, guests began to rise from their tables. It started with a few, then more, until the entire ballroom was on its feet. It wasn't a planned standing ovation. It was a spontaneous reaction, a mixture of respect, curiosity, and perhaps even a touch of rebellious admiration for a woman who had dared to walk into the lion's den with such poise and confidence. Julian watched in stunned silence as his carefully curated guest list paid an unspoken tribute to his ex-wife. He remained seated, his hands clenched beneath the table, his face a mask of carefully controlled neutrality. Inside, however, a maelstrom of emotions raged. He felt humiliated, outmaneuvered, and strangely impressed. Isabella reached her table and acknowledged the standing ovation with a serene smile. She sat down, her gaze briefly meeting Julian's across the room. There was no malice in her eyes, no triumph, just a quiet knowing that spoke volumes. The room slowly began to settle, the guests resuming their seats with a renewed sense of anticipation. The energy in the ballroom had shifted. The focus was no longer solely on Julian Thorne, the benevolent host. Now all eyes were on Isabella Sterling, the unexpected guest of honor, the woman who had turned his carefully orchestrated evening into a real-life drama. The game had changed, and Julian knew with a sinking feeling that Isabella had just made her most powerful move. The dinner service continued, but the atmosphere in the grand ballroom had irrevocably changed. The polite chatter had become more subdued, punctuated by nervous glances towards Isabella's table and furtive whispers. Julian tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, engaging in conversation with the dignitaries seated beside him. But his mind was elsewhere, replaying Isabella's entrance and the subsequent standing ovation. He couldn't deny the impact of her arrival. It was more than just a social faux pas. It was a power play executed with flawless precision. She hadn't stormed in, causing a scene. She had simply arrived elegant and self-assured and allowed the sheer audacity of her presence to speak for itself. Across the room, Isabella held court at her table, surrounded by a group of equally well-dressed and influential individuals. She laughed easily, her conversation animated, giving no outward indication of the undercurrent of tension that permeated the room. But Julian, who knew her better than anyone, could sense the subtle undercurrent of steel beneath her polished exterior. This wasn't just about enjoying a charity gala. This was about reclaiming her narrative. Later in the evening, after the main course had been cleared, Charles Graham returned to the stage to introduce the program for the night, a series of speeches highlighting the work of the Children's Hope Foundation, followed by a live auction. Julian delivered his prepared remarks, speaking passionately about the importance of their mission, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his words were falling somewhat flat. The audience's attention seemed divided, their curiosity about the unfolding drama overshadowing their focus on the cause. As the auction began, Julian watched as Isabella actively participated, bidding generously on several high-value items. Each successful bid drew applause and admiring glances, further solidifying her presence as a significant player in the room, both philanthropically and socially. He found himself wanting to know what she was thinking, what her ultimate goal was. Was this about revenge, about proving her success? Or was it something else entirely? The years since their divorce had created a chasm between them, filled with unanswered questions and unspoken resentments. Tonight, that chasm felt more vast than ever. During a brief intermission, Julian found himself cornered by Eleanor Vance, a prominent society columnist, known for her sharp wit and even sharper pen. "Julian, darling," she purred, her eyes gleaming with undisguised curiosity. "What a delightful surprise to see Isabella here tonight. Such a generous sponsor. A true testament to the power of forgiveness, wouldn't you say?" Julian forced a tight smile. "Indeed, Eleanor. We are grateful for Sterling Enterprises' support." "Of course, darling," Eleanor continued, her gaze unwavering. And what a statement she made with that entrance. Quite the showstopper. "Isabella always had a flair for the dramatic," Julian replied, his voice carefully neutral. Eleanor chuckled. "That she did. One wonders what the next act will be." With that, she patted his arm and moved on, leaving Julian feeling like a specimen under a microscope. He needed a moment to himself. He slipped away from the main ballroom and found refuge in a quiet anteroom. The opulent decor, velvet drapes, antique furniture, did little to soothe his frayed nerves. He poured himself a glass of water, his hand trembling slightly. Just as he was trying to compose himself, the door to the anteroom opened, and Isabella walked in. For a moment they stood in silence, the only sound the faint murmur of conversation from the ballroom. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension, a legacy of their shared past. Isabella broke the silence. "Julian," she said, her voice calm and composed. "Isabella," he replied, his tone carefully measured. "I must say," she continued, a hint of a smile playing on her lips, "you seem surprised to see me." "Frankly, yes," Julian admitted. "I wasn't aware that Sterling Enterprises would be such a significant sponsor." "I made the arrangements recently," she said simply. "I believe in the work of the Children's Hope Foundation." Julian raised an eyebrow. "Philanthropy. That's your primary motivation." Isabella's smile faded. "My motivations are my own, Julian. But let's just say that I believe in supporting worthy causes. And perhaps in making my presence felt." Their eyes met, and in that moment, years of unspoken words seemed to hang between them. There was hurt resentment, but also a flicker of something else, a recognition of the bond that had once existed between them. "You certainly achieved that," Julian said, his voice low. The standing ovation was quite theatrical. The reaction of your guests was their own. Julian, Isabella replied, her tone firm. "I simply walked into a room you knew you weren't exactly invited to," he countered. "I was invited as a sponsor," she corrected him. "A platinum-level sponsor. My invitation was as valid as anyone else's in this room." The silence returned thick with unspoken accusations and lingering emotions. Julian knew that this chance encounter was just the beginning. Isabella's presence at the gala was not just a fleeting moment. It was a declaration, a sign that their paths were destined to cross again in ways neither of them could have fully predicted. The tension between Julian and Isabella remained palpable throughout the rest of the evening, though they largely avoided direct interaction. Julian busied himself with his hosting duties, while Isabella continued to engage with the other guests, her charm and intelligence clearly making a positive impression. As the gala drew to a close, Julian found himself cornered by Arthur Finch, the art collector he had seen speaking with Lady Beatrice earlier. Julian, my boy Arthur, said, his eyes twinkling. Fascinating evening. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you, Arthur, Julian replied, trying to sound enthusiastic. And Isabella, Arthur continued, undeterred. What a remarkable woman. I had no idea Sterling Enterprises had become such a force. They've been busy, Julian said curtly. Indeed, Arthur mused. We were just discussing her recent acquisition of the old Hawthorne building, downtown. Prime real estate. A very shrewd move. Julian's blood ran cold. The Hawthorne building had been a property he had been eyeing for years, a key piece in his long-term development plans. He had assumed it was still tied up in legal wrangling. Isabella had not only re-emerged as a financial powerhouse, but was now directly competing with him in the business world. Just then, Isabella approached their small group. Arthur, it was lovely speaking with you earlier, she said, her smile warm and genuine. The pleasure was all mine, my dear. Arthur replied, his gaze admiring. I was just complimenting Julian on your impressive business acumen. Isabella's eyes flickered to Julian, a subtle challenge in their depths. Thank you, Arthur. I believe in seizing opportunities when they arise. A trait you clearly share with Julian, Arthur said, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. Perhaps you two should collaborate on a project sometime. Think of the synergy. Julian and Isabella exchanged a strained glance. Collaboration was the furthest thing from their minds. As Arthur moved away to speak with another guest, Julian turned to Isabella. The Hawthorne building, he asked, his voice tight. A very promising investment, she replied, her tone deliberately nonchalant. I was under the impression that property was unavailable. Sometimes things become available to those who are persistent, she said, her gaze unwavering. Julian realized that Isabella's sponsorship of the Gala wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a larger strategy, a calculated re-entry into the world she had been forced to leave, and she was not afraid to compete with him directly. The following week brought a series of unexpected developments. Several prominent members of Julian's inner circle, trusted advisors and long-time associates, quietly reached out to Isabella requesting meetings. He learned through the grapevine that she had been receiving them, listening intently to their proposals and ideas. He couldn't fathom what she was up to. Was she trying to poach his people, undermine his business, or was there something else at play? One afternoon, Emily came into his office, her face troubled. Mr. Thorne, she said hesitantly, I've received some unusual requests. What kind of requests? Julian asked, his patience wearing thin. Several of our major investors have inquired about the possibility of diversifying their portfolios with Sterling Enterprises. Julian stared at her in disbelief. Isabella was not only competing with him, she was actively attracting his investors. This was no longer just about social maneuvering. This was a full-scale business war. He knew he had to act, and he had to act decisively. He couldn't afford to underestimate Isabella any longer. She was no longer the wounded ex-wife he had dismissed. She was a formidable opponent, and she was coming for him. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. Catherine, he said, his voice grim. I need your help. Catherine Davies was a notorious corporate strategist, known for her ruthlessness and her ability to turn any situation to her client's advantage. Julian had hired her during his divorce proceedings, and she had played a crucial role in his victory. Now he needed her expertise again. The game had changed, and he needed a new weapon in his arsenal. He had no idea what Isabella's next move would be, but he knew he had to be prepared. The battle for control, both social and corporate, had officially begun. Julian's decision to bring Catherine Davies back into his fold marked a significant shift in his approach. He was no longer content to simply react to Isabella's moves. He was ready to go on the offensive. Catherine, with her sharp intellect and her reputation for playing hardball was the perfect strategist to help him counter Isabella's growing influence. Their initial meetings were intense brainstorming sessions, analyzing Isabella's recent activities and trying to predict her next steps. Catherine was particularly interested in Isabella's acquisition of the Hawthorne building. That property is key. "Julian," she explained, pacing around his office, "it's not just about the real estate itself. It's about the message it sends. It shows that Isabella is serious, that she's here to stay, and that she's not afraid to go head-to-head with you. I need to find a way to undermine that deal." Julian said, his jaw tight. "Find any weakness, any loophole." Catherine shook her head. "That would be too obvious, Julian. And it could backfire. We need a more strategic approach. We need to show that Thorne Industries is still the dominant force, the one investors should be betting on." Their plan began to take shape. Julian, under Catherine's guidance, launched a series of high-profile initiatives. A major expansion into a new market, a groundbreaking technological innovation, and a significant philanthropic pledge that dwarfed Isabella's Gala sponsorship. The message was clear. Thorne Industries was thriving, innovating, and committed to growth. Meanwhile, Catherine began to work behind the scenes, subtly reminding investors of Julian's long track record of success and the stability of Thorne Industries compared to the relatively new Sterling Enterprises. She didn't directly criticize Isabella, but she skillfully planted seeds of doubt, highlighting the risks associated with investing in a less established company. The battle for public perception was fierce. The business media closely followed every move, fueling the narrative of a high-stakes rivalry between the former spouses. Julian and Isabella became the subjects of countless articles, speculating on their motivations and predicting the outcome of their silent war. Isabella, for her part, remained outwardly unfazed by Julian's counteroffensive. Sterling Enterprises continued to pursue its own growth strategy, securing new deals and attracting a steady stream of investors. She even announced a major partnership with a leading international firm, further solidifying her company's credibility. Julian found himself increasingly frustrated by Isabella's resilience. Every move he made seemed to be met with an equally strategic response. He had underestimated her ambition and her ability to play the game. One evening, Catherine called Julian with an intriguing piece of information. "Julian," she said, her voice low, "I've been looking into the financing behind Isabella's acquisition of the Hawthorne building. It seems she secured a significant loan from a relatively unknown investment group." Unknown how Julian asked, his interest piqued. As in, they have very little public presence, no major deals, no significant portfolio. It's almost as if they appeared out of nowhere. Julian felt a flicker of possibility. "Do you think there's something unusual about them?" "It's worth looking into," Catherine replied. "I'm digging deeper, but it's possible Isabella's financial backing isn't as solid as it appears." Catherine's investigation led her down a rabbit hole of shell corporations and offshore accounts. The investment group that had financed Isabella's Hawthorne building purchase was indeed shadowy, their origins and true ownership deliberately obscured. Catherine's instincts told her that there was more to this story than met the eye. She finally uncovered a crucial link. The primary investor behind the mysterious group had a long and complicated history of unethical business practices and was currently under investigation by several international regulatory bodies. If this connection became public, it could severely damage Isabella's reputation and potentially jeopardize the Hawthorne building deal. Julian knew this was a risky move. Exposing Isabella's potential ties to such a disreputable figure could be seen as a desperate attempt to undermine her success, but the opportunity was too significant to ignore. Under Catherine's guidance, Julian carefully leaked the information to a trusted investigative journalist. The story broke the following week, sending shockwaves through the business world. Headlines screamed about Isabella's controversial financing, and questions were raised about her due diligence and judgment. The fallout was immediate. Several of Sterling Enterprises' recent deals were put on hold, and some investors began to express concern. The carefully crafted image of Isabella as a savvy and ethical business leader was suddenly under threat. Julian watched the unfolding events with a mixture of satisfaction and unease. He had landed a significant blow, but he knew that Isabella was not one to back down easily. He braced himself for her inevitable counterattack. He had thrown down the gauntlet, and he knew that the final act of their high-stakes drama was about to begin. The exposé on Isabella's financing sent a tremor through her carefully constructed world. Sterling Enterprises faced intense scrutiny, and the future of the Hawthorne Building project hung in the balance. Julian watched with a sense of grim satisfaction, believing he had finally gained the upper hand. However, Isabella's response was not what he expected. Instead of lashing out or retreating, she addressed the allegations head-on. She issued a public statement, acknowledging the concerns, vowing to conduct a thorough internal review of the financing arrangements. She emphasized her commitment to transparency and ethical business practices, and while she didn't explicitly sever ties with the controversial investment group, she made it clear that she would take swift action if any wrongdoing was uncovered. Her calm and measured response seemed to quell some of the initial panic. While the cloud of suspicion remained, many admired her handling of the crisis. Julian had expected a fight, but Isabella had chosen a different path, one that surprised and frankly impressed him. Then came the unexpected twist. Catherine Davies, Julian's own formidable strategist, received a discreet message requesting a meeting. The sender, Isabella Sterling. Intrigued and slightly suspicious, Catherine agreed. They met in a neutral location, a quiet corner of a high-end hotel lobby. "Ms. Davies." Isabella began, her tone direct but polite. "Thank you for meeting with me, Ms. Sterling." Catherine replied, her expression carefully neutral. "I know you were instrumental in uncovering the information about my financing," Isabella continued. "And while I won't pretend that it hasn't caused significant challenges for Sterling Enterprises, I also understand that you were simply doing your job." Catherine remained silent, waiting for Isabella's point. "What you may not know," Isabella said, her gaze steady, "is that I was also unaware of the full extent of the primary investor's questionable background. The deal was structured through several layers of intermediaries, and the information was deliberately obscured." Catherine raised an eyebrow, a hint of skepticism in her eyes. "I realize this may sound convenient," Isabella said, anticipating Catherine's doubt. "But I assure you, I am taking this matter extremely seriously. I have already initiated legal proceedings to extricate Sterling Enterprises from the agreement." Then Isabella made an unexpected proposition. "Ms. Davies, you are known for your strategic brilliance. I would like to offer you a consulting role to help Sterling Enterprises navigate this situation and ensure that we emerge stronger and more transparent than before." Catherine was taken aback. This was the last thing she had expected. "Why would you offer me this?" Catherine asked, her voice carefully controlled. "I work for Julian Thorne. We are by definition adversaries." "Precisely," Isabella replied, a faint smile playing on her lips. "You know Julian's strategies, his weaknesses, his strengths, and I have no doubt that your loyalty to him is unwavering. But I also believe that you value integrity and a good challenge. This situation requires a delicate and strategic approach, and I believe your expertise would be invaluable." Catherine was silent for a long moment, considering Isabella's offer. It was audacious, unexpected, and potentially brilliant. "I will need to think about this, Ms. Sterling," Catherine finally said. "Of course," Isabella replied. "But consider this perhaps it's time for a different kind of alliance. One based not on animosity, but on mutual respect and a shared commitment to finding the best possible outcome." Catherine returned to Julian with the details of her meeting with Isabella. Julian was stunned by the offer. He saw it as a clever ploy, an attempt by Isabella to gain inside information and undermine him further. He vehemently opposed Catherine even considering the proposal. "She's trying to play you," Catherine Julian insisted. "Don't fall for it." But Catherine saw something different in Isabella's offer. She saw an opportunity to understand her opponent better, to potentially influence the situation in a way that would ultimately benefit Julian, albeit indirectly. After much deliberation, Catherine accepted Isabella's offer with the caveat that her primary loyalty remained with Julian. She began working with Sterling Enterprises, helping them to restructure their financing and implement stricter due diligence procedures. The collaboration between Catherine and Isabella was kept largely secret. To the outside world, the rivalry between Julian and Isabella appeared to continue. But behind the scenes, a subtle shift was taking place. As Catherine worked closely with Isabella, she began to gain a new perspective on her former adversary. She saw her intelligence, her resilience, and her genuine commitment to building a successful and ethical business. She also came to understand the extent to which Isabella had been blindsided by the actions of the rogue investor. Catherine eventually brokered a resolution that allowed Sterling Enterprises to secure new reputable financing for the Hawthorne Building project, albeit under stricter terms. The scandal faded from the headlines, and Isabella emerged with her reputation bruised but intact. One evening, Catherine met with Julian to update him on the situation. "The Hawthorne Building project is back on track," she reported. "Isabella has secured new financing, and the controversy is starting to die down." Julian listened intently, a grudging respect in his eyes. "She handled this well," he admitted. "She did," Catherine agreed. "And I believe she has learned a valuable lesson." Then Catherine revealed the full extent of her involvement with Sterling Enterprises. Julian was initially furious, feeling betrayed. But Catherine calmly explained her reasoning, emphasizing that her actions had ultimately helped to stabilize the situation and prevent a potentially damaging and prolonged public battle. As Julian considered Catherine's words, he began to see the wisdom in her approach. The rivalry with Isabella had been consuming him, diverting his attention from his own business goals. Perhaps it was time for a truce, a recognition that they could both be successful without constantly trying to undermine each other. A few weeks later, Julian received a personal invitation from Isabella. Sterling Enterprises was hosting a small private reception to celebrate the new financing for the Hawthorne Building. To his surprise, he accepted. When he arrived at the reception, Isabella greeted him warmly. There was no trace of animosity in her eyes, only a quiet understanding. "Julian," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." "Isabella," he replied, shaking her hand. "Congratulations on securing the new financing." They spoke for a while, not about their past, but about their future business endeavors. There was a newfound respect between them, a recognition of their shared ambition and resilience. The rivalry hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had evolved. It was no longer a bitter feud fueled by resentment, but a more measured competition, perhaps even one with a hint of mutual admiration. The billionaire who had tried to block his ex-wife's name had ultimately found himself in an unexpected truce, a testament to the fact that even the most dramatic real-life stories can take unforeseen turns. 3 months passed. The fragile truce between Julian Thorne and Isabella Sterling settled into an unspoken, carefully observed protocol. The New York business world, which had been transfixed by their public feud, now watched with a different kind of fascination. They were no longer combatants in a gladiatorial arena, but two formidable lions circling the same territory, acknowledging each other's power with a wary but undeniable respect. They competed, yes, fiercely for contracts, for properties, for talent. But the cutthroat edge was gone. The attacks were no longer personal, the victories no longer celebrated as conquests over a fallen foe. Julian found the change unsettlingly peaceful. His days were less consumed by paranoia and more by pure strategy. He found himself analyzing Isabella's business moves not as personal affronts, but as brilliant plays in a complex game he was privileged to be a part of. He saw her at a tech conference in Soho, commanding a room of venture capitalists with the same poise she had displayed at the Gala. Their eyes met across the crowded floor. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She returned it. It was a silent acknowledgement, a recognition that they were peers, titans in their own right. The first tremor came not as a thunderclap, but as a series of strange, disconnected anomalies. A key shipping route for Thorn Industries' European imports was suddenly choked by a string of inexplicable regulatory hurdles in a small Baltic port. A week later, one of Sterling Enterprises' most promising green energy startups in South America was hit with a crippling, politically motivated lawsuit from a previously unknown environmental group. Julian initially saw it as the cost of doing business on a global scale. He dispatched his legal team to handle the port issue, dismissing it as bureaucratic red tape. Isabella likewise viewed the lawsuit as an aggressive but manageable challenge, a shakedown by a local faction looking for a payout. Neither saw the connection. It was Catherine Davies who first pieced the fragments together. She had maintained her unique consulting role, a bridge between the two empires, and her vantage point gave her a perspective neither Julian nor Isabella possessed. She was in Julian's office, a holographic map of global supply chains glowing in the center of the room, when her tablet chimed with an alert. "That's odd," she murmured, her brow furrowing. She cross-referenced the alert with a file she had open. "Julian, the holding company that owns the port authority in Latvia, the one causing you so much trouble." "What about them?" Julian asked, his attention focused on rerouting his cargo through Germany. And Ms. Sterling Catherine continued, her voice gaining a sharp edge, the Shell Corporation funding the lawsuit against her startup in Brazil. They both trace back to the same obscure financial entity registered in Cyprus. Julian turned from the map, his full attention now on Catherine. And that entity, as Catherine's face, was grim. She tapped a final command into her tablet, and a name appeared on the screen, stark and menacing. It's a subsidiary of a private equity firm controlled by Victor Orloff. The name landed in the room like a grenade. Victor Orloff, the shadowy financier whose reputation was a cocktail of ruthlessness and corruption, the man whose money had almost derailed Isabella's entire comeback, the man they had both embarrassed by exposing and severing his financial ties. "He's retaliating," Julian said, his voice a low growl. The implications clicked into place with terrifying speed. This wasn't random bad luck. It was a coordinated, multi-pronged attack. Orloff wasn't just coming for one of them. He was coming for both. Isabella reached the same conclusion a few hours later. Her own intelligence team had followed the money trail from the Brazilian lawsuit and arrived at the same venomous source, Orloff. Her first instinct was a familiar one, to fortify her defenses, to fight this battle alone. She had rebuilt her empire by herself, and she would defend it by herself. Trusting Julian Thorn, even in this new era of civility, felt like a bridge too far. Orloff was her problem. She had brought his money into her company, however unknowingly. But as the day wore on, the scope of Orloff's attack became clearer. A whisper campaign started among her investors, seeding doubts about her leadership. A key supplier for the Hawthorne building project abruptly pulled out, citing unforeseen financial difficulties that felt anything but unforeseen. She realized with a chilling certainty that Orloff wasn't just trying to punish her. He was trying to dismantle her piece by piece, and he was using his vast invisible network to attack her on fronts she couldn't possibly defend all at once. That evening her private line rang. It was Catherine Davies. "He's targeting Julian with equal force," Catherine said without preamble. "A hostile short-selling attack on Thorne Industries' tech stock is being prepared as we speak. Orloff is trying to bleed you both dry, counting on the fact that you'll be too busy watching each other to see him coming for you both." There was a long pause. Isabella walked to the floor-to-ceiling window of her office, looking out at the glittering tapestry of the city. She could see the Thorne Tower, its spire piercing the clouds, a monument to the man who was once her entire world and then her greatest enemy. "What are you suggesting?" Catherine Isabella asked, though she already knew the answer. "A meeting. You and Julian. Tonight. My office. This is bigger than your rivalry. This is about survival." The atmosphere in Catherine Davies's minimalist downtown office was thick enough to taste. Julian stood by the window, his back to the door, arms crossed. Isabella entered her posture, radiating a tense calm. They hadn't been alone in a room together since that brief, charged encounter at the Gala. "Isabella," Julian said, turning to face her. His expression was unreadable. "Julian," she replied, her voice steady. Catherine closed the door, leaving them to it. For a moment, the silence was a chasm filled with 5 years of bitterness, divorce proceedings, public humiliation, and a rivalry that had defined them both. Julian spoke first. "Orloff thinks he can play us against each other. He thinks we'll be so focused on our old war that we won't have the resources to fight a new one. He's using our history as his primary weapon," Isabella agreed, taking a seat at the polished chrome conference table. "He'll hit you expecting me to see it as an opportunity. He'll hit me expecting you to stand back and watch me fall. And a part of you wants to, doesn't it?" Julian's question was blunt, stripped of all pretense. "A part of you sees Thorne Industries taking a hit and thinks he deserves it." Isabella met his gaze without flinching. "Does a part of you not feel the same? After everything, it would be naive to pretend those feelings simply vanish." Her honesty was disarming. "But what I feel is irrelevant. Victor Orloff is a predator. If he takes one of us down, the other is next. He won't stop until he's picked both our bones clean, simply to prove a point." Julian walked to the table and sat opposite her. The space between them felt like a negotiating table and a battlefield all at once. "So what do we do?" he asked. "We fight him," Isabella said simply. "Separately we're vulnerable," Julian reasoned, thinking aloud. "His network is too diffuse. I have the corporate muscle, the established power. You have agility, a network of newer, more disruptive allies. You can move in circles I can't. I can leverage weight you don't have." He paused, the unspoken proposition hanging in the air between them. It was a radical, unthinkable idea, an idea that went against every instinct they had honed over the past 5 years. An alliance, Isabella voiced the word, testing its weight. "You and me. Sterling Enterprises and Thorne Industries. A united front. It's insane," Julian admitted. "It's the only move he won't see coming." She countered, a spark of the old fire in her eyes. "He's banking on our division. The most powerful thing we can do is present him with our unity." The implications were staggering. It would mean sharing sensitive information, trusting each other's intel, coordinating strategies. It would mean placing their destinies and the fate of their empires in the hands of the one person they had once trusted above all others, and who had subsequently caused them the most profound pain. Julian stared at her, really seeing her not as the woman who had left, or the rival who had reappeared, but as the brilliant, formidable strategist she had always been. He saw the same fierce intelligence that had first captivated him all those years ago. There would have to be rules, he said, his voice dropping into a business-like tone. A formal agreement, clear lines of communication. No independent actions on this matter without consultation. Agreed, Isabella said, leaning forward. Complete transparency on all intelligence related to Orloff. We pool our resources, legal, financial, and cybersecurity. We designate Catherine as the official liaison to mitigate any direct friction. And when it's over, Julian asked the question, hanging heavy. When Orloff is dealt with, Isabella's expression softened for a fraction of a second. When it's over, she said, we dissolve the alliance and go back to being competitors. She held his gaze. But perhaps competitors who understand that there are far more dangerous monsters in the world than the devil you know. Julian stood up and extended his hand across the table. It was a gesture that felt both monumental and terrifyingly uncertain. After a heartbeat's hesitation, Isabella stood and took it. Her grip was firm, her hand cool. It wasn't a handshake of reconciliation or forgiveness. It was the handshake of two sovereigns, two lions forging an alliance not out of affection, but out of a mutual and grudging respect for each other's power, and a shared instinct for survival. The war with Victor Orloff had begun, and for the first time in years, Julian Thorne and Isabella Sterling were on the same side. The saga of Julian Thorne and Isabella Sterling is a potent reminder that life, much like the most captivating dramas, is full of unexpected twists and turns. Julian's attempt to erase Isabella from his carefully curated world backfired spectacularly, leading to a public showdown at his own charity gala. Isabella's powerful entrance and the subsequent standing ovation served as a potent symbol of her resilience and the undeniable force of a woman determined to reclaim her narrative. The ensuing battle for social and corporate dominance was a roller coaster of strategic maneuvers and calculated risks culminating in the surprising alliance forged by Catherine Davies. This unlikely partnership ultimately led to a fragile but significant truce between Julian and Isabella, a recognition that their shared history, though fraught with conflict, didn't have to define their future. Their story filled with ambition, betrayal, and the ultimate emergence of respect underscores the complexities of human relationships and the ever-shifting dynamics of power. It leaves us contemplating the true nature of success and the unexpected paths to resolution. If you enjoyed this dramatic tale of ambition and resilience, please give this video a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories. Your support helps us bring more real-life dramas to your screen. What did you think of Isabella's unexpected entrance? And were you surprised by the truce? Let us know in the comments below.